Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is Iran and Iran's strategy style. Strategically, Iran is much smarter than most Americans would like to believe. And right now, Iranian strategy is to play games with the United States and with Israel, hoping to drive either one or even better, both of their nemesis to make far-reaching diplomatic fatal mistakes. Iran does not like to get its own hands dirty. Iran likes to pull the strings of its puppets, or in diplomatic speak, its proxies. Most often, Iran does not itself actually make the advances, or rather the sabers, or attack the United States or Israeli resources in the region. Iran uses their proxies to carry out their missions, their dirty work. Several recent cases in point demonstrate just how devious and sly Iran is at this game, and just how gullible and even self-deluded both the United States and Israel are when it comes to Iran. In the first example, Israel responded to an Iranian cyber attack. They struck at Iran's infrastructure by way of a counter-cyber attack. In the second example, the United States struck an Iranian-backed military base, a militia base, in Syria. Both attacks were successful, and both the United States and Israel pridefully boasted that they had taught Iran a lesson for stepping out of line. As the United States and Israel soon learned, hubris is a dangerous emotion when it comes to Iran, because in response, Iran sprang into action again. They activated their proxies. The result for Israel was a massive oil spill off the Mediterranean coastline. Environmentalists predict that it will take decades to repair the damage to the water, to the coast, and to the beaches of Israel. The rich marine life along the coastline was decimated. Washed ashore were all forms of fish and fowl, all coated with oil and tar. Huge globs of tar covered the area. It took a while, but Israel finally pinpointed the tanker that caused the spill. It was a Libyan tanker surreptitiously taking oil from Iran to Syria. According to Israel, the vessel sailed through the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea without activating its GPS transponder. The transponder was turned on only when the vessel crossed through the Suez Canal, and it turned off again upon entering Israeli waters and heading north towards Syria. The vessel, named the Emerald and flying a Panamanian flag, slowly sailed north on February 1st. On February 2nd, the Emerald dumped its oil, or a lot of it, and then made its way to Syria. There has been no comment from Iran on this issue, but the ante has been upped. The dumping of oil along the Mediterranean coastline, along Israel's coastline, took terror to a level not seen in many years. This was an act of environmental terror, unlike any other in recent history. It was an enemy attack, a deliberate act of destruction, and Israel was the target. The second example is the recent Biden administration. The response to rocket attacks against U.S. forces in the Middle East region. The Biden administration launched a retaliation raid in Syria against Iranian militia forces. The message to Iran was, we may be new at this, the new administration, but we're serious. We're not afraid to hit you. Stop and learn your lesson. The lesson learned from Iran was to hit even harder. A proxy militia then fired 10 rockets at a U.S. base. The third example of Iran's game was via Iranian and Israeli merchant marine ship named Helios Ray, flying a Bermudan flag. The ship was targeted and hit by 2 missiles above the waterline. Once again, Israel traced the strike back to Iran. It is obvious by now that rather than reconciliation, Iran is interested in escalation. Iran is not open to re-education. If the United States and Israel must recalibrate and learn the lesson of these attacks that they are teaching them. And the lessons they must learn is how to prepare to prevent further attacks, all different kinds of further attacks, to expect the unexpected, on land, in air, and on the sea, and in cyberspace. Nothing is off limits, and nothing is out of bounds when it comes to Iran. Easier said than done, I realize. The open seas, especially merchant trade, commercial ships, and the environment had not really been on the arena of Iranian targets until now. U.S. encampments have been. They've been targets. They need to be shored up even more. Iran knows what they're doing. They know how to attack, and they know to expect a response. They also know that when dealing with Israel and the United States, the responses will be measured. And then Iran will make the next move. That is, after all, how these games are played. Never, ever underestimate Iran. Remember, Persia was the culture that invented the game of chess. That is a lesson for all of us. Coming up next, points of view. First up is a column from the San Diego Union Tribune entitled, Opinion, Jewish Families Sit Shiva on Zoom During Pandemic. Though not the same, still we grieve together. Now, what happens is, this is written by Ron Schulman, the rabbi, senior rabbi of Congregation Beth El in La Jolla, and a member of the San Diego Union Tribune's Community Advisory Board. Rabbi Schulman lives in La Jolla. This piece explains that even though it's a necessity right now, our new traditions of mourning, a graveside behavior created because of COVID, cannot and do not take the place of in-person compassion. Schulman begins, after the recitation of psalms and eulogies, mourners seek solace in the variety of Jewish gravesite customs. They tear a garment or a ribbon for cathartic release. Heartbroken, they approach their loved ones' graves. The death has torn them apart, their love unending. Time helps memory mend their bond. Grasping a shovel and grasping for breath, reluctantly and gently, they place dirt over the casket, just lowered down into the ground. They wipe away their tears and replace the shovel into the mound of dirt. The next mourner chooses to pick it up, a voluntary act of kindness towards the deceased. Over the past year, few others have been there to pick up the shovel. Instead, a new ritual. After a mourner does hold the shovel, the funeral director squirts sanitizer into the mourner's hands. Schulman continues and writes that few people are even present at the funerals and the burials. And if they are there, they keep safe distance and do not allow for even giving a hug. He continues, for those who are present, 6 feet distance, replace the consoling embrace of family and friends. Mourners grieve their personal loss in the absence of their community. A face mask covers their forlorn expressions, visible in their eyes alone. Their loved one's body returned to the earth. Mourners recite their prayer, the mourner's Kaddish. After the last Amen, the consoling community forms 2 lines. The mourners walk through, away from the death and back to life. While walking, they receive a prayerful words of consolation of family and friends. Now Schulman explains that every life has meaning. Every life. He writes, each life is precious. Every death is significant. Tragically, it's been hard to remember the truth during this pandemic year of grief and devastation. More than 2.5 million human beings have died. Horrific as that number is, more upsetting is the loss of each and every one of them as a loving partner, a beloved parent, child, sibling, grandparent, aunt, uncle, niece, nephew, cousin, colleague, or dear friend. Schulman concludes with an unbelievable idea. Each of their families deserve our compassionate response and support as much while we're apart as when we're together. Adapting the various customs of Jewish mourning rites this past year may have made them ritually and emotionally incomplete, but certainly no less significant. Next up is a column by Adam Milstein. Milstein is a generous philanthropist. This column was published on February 9th, 2021 in the Jerusalem Post. It's entitled, How to Practice Philanthropy to Create a Lasting Impact. Philanthropy and tzedakah in general are essential parts of the Jewish world. Gifts engine the creative and educational framework that powers our Jewish institutions and our ideas. Periodically, I like to dedicate some time to understanding philanthropy and tzedakah. Milstein begins. Some say that it's more challenging to effectively donate money than to earn it. I agree. It's a no-brainer to choose the nonprofit organizations you support based on your personal acquaintances or social affiliations. But real impact can only be achieved by creating a strategic philanthropic plan and being well-meaning to implement it. There have been few experiences in my life more rewarding or meaningful than becoming an active philanthropist. Now Milstein describes himself and some of his causes and what he has achieved in his time as a philanthropist. He identifies 3 types of philanthropy, and he writes, I've come to realize that there are 3 main approaches to philanthropy: specific philanthropy, social club philanthropy, and thirdly, strategic impact philanthropy. Milstein believes that the most important one is the third. It's strategic impact philanthropy, and he concludes his column by explaining just how valuable that philanthropy is. Adam Milstein writes, Gila, that's his wife, Gila and I have seen firsthand how strategic impact philanthropy makes a significant nationwide impact. We see the results within our lifetime and are able to leave an enduring legacy to our children, grandchildren, and community. I invite my fellow major philanthropists and philanthropists-to-be to join me in becoming a strategic impact philanthropist. It requires more than just putting your money where your mouth is, but the return is beyond imaginable. Nothing of lasting impact can be achieved without your own blood, sweat, and tears. An excellent piece. Thank you very much, Adam Milstein. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. I want to show you 7 cartoons and memes and a few headlines today. First up is a play on the German language. I've spoken in the past about German. One of the most fascinating parts of German language is its ability to create new words by putting words together. It's the equivalent of an English compound word on steroids. I found this to be very, very interesting, and this is a fascinating news item. The item goes, Germans have coined more than 1,200 words to talk about coronavirus. Next up is about a crazy, sugary, popular kids' breakfast cereal, Fruit Loops. And it's now a topping for pizza. Just like onions, mushrooms, peppers, you can buy pizza with Fruit Loops. The comment in the news was, Fruit Loops on pizza? First, why? But also, where can you get it in Iowa? Third up is a meme that makes fun of the famous set of jokes that begin, a priest, a rabbi, and the minister walk into a bar. The picture is of a rabbit holding a glass of beer, and the caption reads, a priest, a rabbit, and the minister walk into a bar. The rabbi says, I might be a typo. Next, 2 memes poke fun at the new world that we live in and the dangers and the protections that have emerged. Don't misunderstand. There are real dangers and real serious issues. I'm not diminishing these issues because they are really significant dangers. And the dangers are out there and appropriate, and protection is very important. But these memes are still funny nonetheless. The first one reads, I survived spankings, lead paint, rusty playgrounds, secondhand smoke, toy guns, no seatbelts, no helmets, and drinking from the hose. This next meme is very similar in theme and genre. 6 kids are playing with toy guns. The meme reads, this is how my friends and I played back in the day. Not one of us grew up and killed anyone. That's funny. It's funny because we played with toy guns all the time growing up. The next is a cartoon, and an editor is speaking to Charles Dickens. She's reworking his opening line. She says, we're going to nix the first line. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. We don't want to offend anyone who has had bad times, and we also don't want to glorify people who have had good times. This is the opening of Dickens' classic work, A Tale of Two Cities. It's one of the greatest openings in English literature. Thankfully, this is a cartoon and not reality. I'm going to read you the opening line of The Tale of Two Cities. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. It was the season of life, it was the season of darkness. It was the spring of hope, it was the winter of despair. We had everything before us, we had nothing before us. We were all going direct to heaven, we were all going direct the other way. In short, the period was so far like the present period that some of its noisiest authorities insisted on its being received for good or for evil. in the superlative degree of comparison only. That was Charles Dickens in A Tale of Two Cities, his opening line. Unbelievable. Finally, we see a person who has a slingshot and is firing his file cabinets into the sky. His colleague asks, "Are you sure you know how to upload the files to the cloud?" Now that's funny, especially in an era of high tech and people who are limited. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Israel is investing millions of shekels to combat fake news on the internet about COVID-19. Over the past few weeks, as Israel has hit major milestones in vaccine numbers and prepares to vaccinate the remaining of those still unvaccinated population in Israel, an online movement has developed spreading hoaxes and lies about the vaccine. Those behind these hoaxes couch their lies in pseudoscience. Israelis who have not been vaccinated have done so out of choice. They need to be convinced. They need to be educated. And because of these fake news sites, it's hard to dissuade them. Experts say that these hoaxers are endangering individual lives as well as the greater health and well-being of the population, the entire nation. 500,000 Israelis over the age of 50 still have not been vaccinated. They will get sick and some will die simply because they were told these lies about the vaccine. Websites quoting real Israeli medical experts are now countering those websites. In simple terms, they explain the science behind the vaccines and they are debunking the myths. Hopefully, they will be saving lives. President Assad of Syria and his wife, Asma, tested positive for COVID. Both the president and his wife are 55 years old. Asma had cancer about 3 years ago. She was treated and has fully recovered. The presidential office said that they only have mild symptoms. They're isolating in the palace and will return to work in a few weeks. Several important points have emerged with that report. Telling us that Assad and his wife have COVID is very unusual. It's not the modus operandi of Syria at all. Not telling us how serious the cases are is also very telling. The Syrian president's office lies all the time. They are not lying about COVID, but they are most probably lying about the symptoms. As an example of a lie, according to Syrian health officials, only 16,000 people have even contracted COVID in Syria. That's a big lie. That cannot be the case. In the dictatorship, information about the president or about national health is almost never made public. And when it is made public, it is almost always inaccurate. It would be very interesting to see if any further details, truth or half-truths or lies, will be released.
According my trusted friend, including doctor, they suggest should take this injection.
The Dalai Lama has received his COVID vaccine. It was the first of 2 vaccines that he will get. After receiving the shot, the 85-year-old Tibetan spiritual leader spoke to the world. He spoke to his ardent followers and to all those who will listen to him, and he has many. He urged them all to be brave and to get the vaccine.
Also, should take this injection for greater benefit. So that's very important. So I took that. So I want to share. More people should have courage to take this injection.
The Dalai Lama was the latest in a series of leaders, especially spiritual leaders, who were urging people to vaccinate. They are combating a growing number of anti-vaxxers who have created these conspiracy cults. They claim that the COVID is a hoax in general. They also claim that the vaccine will cause damage to one's health. It is these conspiracy theories that are the real hoax. The Dalai Lama stood up and is helping to save lives, not just the lives of his followers. Israel's Ministry of Education announced that over 500 kindergartens have been closed because of COVID. It's the largest number yet at a single time. Kindergartens have been closed either because the children have been exposed to COVID or because their teachers have contracted COVID. In an effort to protect the teachers and the students and their families, the kindergartens had to be shuttered. Anat Dadon, the director of preschool unions in Israel, is quoted as saying, "Parents are sending their children knowing they may be exposed to a carrier of the virus. We have not seen so many kindergartens forced to close and staff and children made to quarantine since the start of the pandemic." The simple fact is this. In Israel, for the next few months, there will continue to be rolling closures of schools as students and teachers continue to test for COVID, and some of them come back with positive test results. Most great agreements are hammered together behind closed doors, and that should be known, because when you do things in public, people respond, and it stops the movement. It stops the progress. Announcements of the final product are much more impressive than details of the day-to-day bickering inherent in forming any agreement that should be kept in the shadows. Israel's Foreign Ministry announced that the United States and Israel have come to an agreement about Iran. Both countries agree that there will be no surprises. That means that Israel will not attack Iran without telling the United States in advance, and the United States will not open doors for Iran to enter negotiations or begin a new strategy without letting Israel know in advance. Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi said, "If anyone thought the Americans would run to make an agreement with Iran until now, it did not happen, and I hope it does not happen in the future." Israel has launched an effort to create a regional defense pact. The idea is to come to strategic agreements with numerous countries in the region, bonding together as a group, enabling group members to better protect themselves from aggressive outliers. This defense pact will function similar to NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. If one country is attacked by treaty, it's seen as all the members in the nation, all member nations were attacked. The plan was reported by Khan, a Hebrew language radio network in Israel. It's credited to Israeli Foreign Minister Gabi Ashkenazi with the idea for the plan and the follow-through. So far, the players joining Israel are the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. I predict that both Egypt and Jordan will follow suit very soon. The outliers that will be isolated in the defense pact are Iran and Syria. This could be very useful and intimidating as a defense tool. A mother complained that the homework assignment for her 7-year-old son depicted the Jews as killing Jesus. This took place in England. As a result, the site that the homework was on took down the 19 pages dealing with the Jews as killers of their God. On the site, under the title "The Trial," there was the following quote: "The Jewish leaders wanted Jesus to be guilty. They found it difficult to find anything that he had done wrong, even though they paid people to lie about him. Eventually, they asked him if he was the Son of God. Jesus replied, 'I am.' This was enough. They said this was an insult to God. Jesus was then taken before Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor." And it goes on. In the Christian Bible, you should know, on several occasions where it is written that Jesus says that he is the Son of God, it's only inferred that that's the case. He never actually uses those words. There are people who are teaching children to hate Jews because they are killers of their God. It's medieval, but it's happening today. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. We spoke about Charles Dickens and The Tale of Two Cities. There has been a lot of discussion about whether Oliver Twist, the character Fagin in Oliver Twist, was an anti-Semitic character, and whether Dickens himself was an anti-Semite. Dickens was actually asked this question and responded. He responded, absolutely not. Here are some interesting facts that should help put it all together and into perspective. Irving Howe, about whom we've spoken a short while ago, he wrote the introduction to the Bantam edition of the novel Oliver Twist by Dickens. In his intro, Howe noted that in the first 38 chapters of Oliver Twist, Dickens calls Fagin by name only 42 times, but he calls him Jew 257 times. Fagin was probably modeled after a famous Jewish thief in London named Ike Solomon. In the novel, Fagin takes care of the children. He provides them with skills, protection, housing, food, and this was actually beggars' London. People were hung for stealing a loaf of bread. The trade Fagin taught the children was how to pick pockets and steal. That was important, but it was illegal, but at least it was a job. The offense of portraying Fagin in the end, he was caught, he was hung, and he loses all of his wealth and everything he loves. I'm not certain about Fagin. I think he was a very complicated character, and there certainly had some spots which were very shady about him, but there are also elements that were extremely sympathetic and humane about the Fagin character. That's why he's complicated. You might be shocked to know that actors who portrayed Fagin were amazing. Among them, the greatest, Ben Kingsley, George C. Scott, Richard Dreyfuss, all portrayed Fagin.
If you whisper to me, you remember the box, Oliver, with my pretty things from my old age, Oliver. It's a little way up the chimney in the top front room. It's yours, Oliver. Yours, but we must talk.
Yes. But shall we say a prayer together first? Do. Say only one upon your knees with me, and we can talk all morning.
Outside. You can say, I've gone to sleep, never leave you. You can get me out of the pretty things of yours, my dear, yours.
Oh, God, forgive this wretched man.
That's right. That'll help us on. If I shake and tremble as we pass the gallows, don't you mind? Hurry on. Now.
Have you more to say to him, sir?
Nothing more.
Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.